From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Well, I want to give you some thoughts on Venezuela and the 5-year anniversary of January 6th. But let's start with the late-breaking Wednesday news. I am recording this late Wednesday afternoon, early evening, so you will have information that I don't have. But I just want to give you some preliminary thoughts on this horrible shooting in Minneapolis. Renee Nicole Good is the woman's name, the victim of the shooting. 37-year-old woman from Minneapolis. We don't know too much about her at this point. Her mother did identify her to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. She wasn't a target of any kind of investigation. She just seemed to be out with her neighbors, as folks have been doing in Minneapolis now for months, getting the word out through community social media apps, sharing information as to where ICE is operating, going out to witness, to honk horns and blow whistles and warn their neighbors. Just, doing good work. Of course, she was fatally shot by an ICE agent just half a mile from where George Floyd was murdered. So I'm very anxious to see what kind of protests continue here. They were triggered immediately. I'm anxious to see how they develop over the days and weeks. I think it's worth mentioning that there have been recent spikes in deaths, not so much on the raids themselves, but folks in custody. It's hard to get the numbers, but it's at least 20. Other analysis tells us it might be closer to 30 just over the last year. Of people who have died in ICE detention. By far the deadliest year for that awful statistic. What I'd like to share with you is my take on the video. Maybe you've seen it. I watched it very carefully. In fact, I saw 2 versions of it, and I watched it many times, frame by frame. And if you're just seeing this video on the news, they're bleeping the audio. Because there's a woman, I guess, who's taking the pictures or right next to the phone, who is just horrified by what she's seeing, and she's using language that broadcasters feel they need to cover up as expletives. So the problem is they're also bleeping out the shots, the audio of the shots, and that really helps to tell the picture. So again, I watched this frame by frame several times, and it's really clear. So the one agent walks up briskly to her driver's side door. Her driver's side window is open. He goes immediately to the handle, tries to open it. It's locked. He reaches his left hand inside the opened window. And of course, he's masked, unidentified. By the way, I don't know how long she was there. The video starts just as the ICE vehicles pull up on her, and then they walk up to her. Now, I did hear an NBC reporter claim that they had seen a video that started a little sooner, and you could actually see her arm out of her driver's side window waving the ICE vehicles ahead, like, go ahead, go around me, as if she were pulling out. I didn't see that, but I was curious as to what she was actually doing, because it appears as though she's blocking the street, but she could have been just pulling out of a parking spot. Maybe we'll learn that over time, but as of this recording, I don't know the answer to that. There's going to be a ton more video. There's going to be body cam footage. Everybody has those Ring doorbell cameras. So I'm sure we're going to see a lot more on that. The whole story about somebody being stuck in the snow, I didn't see anybody stuck in any snow. I don't know where that came from. Okay, so anyway, yeah, she backs up, apparently to avoid hitting another ICE agent who was in front of her vehicle. And then she starts going forward, just briefly, pauses for a second, turns to the right to avoid the other agent. She's driving really carefully. There's absolutely no way that an agent can honestly, rightfully claim that his life was in danger. It's ridiculous. It's a lie. There's no life in danger. It's total BS. So this agent at her door, who had immediately gone to her handle, now he's got his left hand inside the vehicle. She backs up for a second to avoid hitting the other agent. She goes forward just for a second. She pauses again to avoid hitting anybody. She's being really careful. Then she turns her wheels sharply again to avoid hitting anybody, and then she accelerates. At which point we hear 3 shots fired, point blank. And again, this is really important that you can hear the audio on this tape. Because on shot number 1, there are 3 total. Shot number 1, he's almost in front of her, but he's off the bumper. He's off to the side. And you can see it in the stills that I grabbed from the video. I put that on my site. So in shot number 1, he is not directly in front of her. He's off to the side. He's still kind of in front. So he shoots and hits the lower corner of her windshield, which apparently does no harm to her. But then shots 2 and 3, he is clearly standing. Again, I grabbed the stills from the tape. He's standing to the side of the vehicle, aiming directly into her driver's side window with his gun right at her head, point blank. The agent was in no danger. There are no other agents anywhere near the path of the vehicle that he may be trying to save. So the ICE statement, the DHS statement, the Kristi Noem statement are complete and utter garbage. They're lies. They called her a domestic terrorist. Of course they did. Noem called her that. The Orange Menace called her that. Stephen Miller called her a terrorist. But that just goes with the program. I'm a terrorist, according to them. You're a terrorist, according to them. Everybody's a terrorist who's not full-blown ruby red MAGA. We don't yet know the name of the shooter as of this recording. I'd love to know that name. I'd love to know the other agents involved. I'd love to know the amount of their training, because we know they've had trouble hiring ICE agents. They're offering huge bonuses. They've lowered the standards. They've shortened training time. We know these things for a fact. So yeah, I'm really anxious to hear all about this shooter. One of the things in the reporting I heard today is that one of the first things they're trained to do is to never stand in front of a vehicle. You're putting yourself and everybody else in danger. So his approach to the vehicle went against all basic training right from the get-go. You're never supposed to fire at a driver while the car is moving. It's just too dangerous for everybody in the neighborhood. You never fire while the vehicle is moving. That's not even going to save you. If a vehicle is headed right at you, taking out the driver isn't going to stop the vehicle if you're in imminent danger. So even if this guy believed it, which I don't buy for a second, he's still in the wrong. Yeah, I'm really anxious to see the Ring camera footage, the body camera footage. So there you go. We'll have plenty to talk about as this story develops and as we get more information. All right. Well, the Venezuela thing, my God. So much ink being spilled, so many pundits up on their tippy toes trying to get every little bit of this. Yeah, it's one of those stories that media gets so excited about. I guess I can understand why, but they don't really serve us or our interests in the way they cover it. And they ignore other stories, like this one. U.S. cuts the number of vaccines recommended for every child, a move slammed by physicians. Yeah, RFK Jr., who comes right out and says it, I saw another headline, that he's leading the way. People ask him, well, who's advising you? He's kind of like the Orange Menace in that regard. Well, I'm the boss. I'm the leader. I make the decisions. He's the ultimate I do my own research idiot. So, reading from the AP here, the U.S. took the unprecedented step of cutting the number of vaccines it recommends for every child. That doesn't mean you can't get the vaccines. It just means, as a parent, you have to talk with your doctors, make sure you're getting the best advice, because you can't count on the federal government anymore for anything. You certainly can't count on them for good medical advice when it comes to public health. So don't just sit back and expect, as we've been able to over the last many decades, well, it's just standard practice to get these vaccines. Anyway, just a little warning, more news from this administration that's not at all surprising. You remember the headline from, I forget how long ago it was, a couple of years, a new international agreement that there would be a minimum corporate tax. Remember that? Everybody liked it. Thank God, a little bit of fairness. Well, that's been reversed now by the regime. A new international agreement that exempts large U.S. corporations. So anything good, even just tiny baby steps good, being reversed. The Epstein files reached a little bit of a milestone. Of course, was it December 19th was the deadline, which they missed, and they continue to miss. Only a small fraction of the files released as required by law. And then we passed another deadline. January 3rd was the day that the DOJ, according to law, was required to explain their redactions. The people who wrote the law figured, well, yeah, there are going to be some redactions for sure. No getting around that. But the DOJ has to explain why, and they have until January 3rd to do it. Well, they blew right past that with no intention of following the law. The regime is just lawless in every possible way. Instead, on January 3rd, they dropped bombs on Venezuela and kidnapped Maduro. So I guess they were doing more important things. If you're having a hard time following this story, I would say that's all right, because most of the coverage is just pointless. It's nothing you even need to know. All we really need to know is that it was utterly and completely lawless, unconstitutional, violation of international law. By this precedent, I guess the regime can go into Greenland, kidnap whoever's in charge there and take over. Lots of bad guys out there. Bukele in El Salvador, Netanyahu in Israel, Putin, the Orange Menace himself. They're all criminals. Who's going to come attack them, detain them? Canada, you want to come down and drop a few bombs well placed in Washington, D.C. and carry off the orange meat puppet and Melania? Put them on trial in Canada? You have any number of charges you could file. They're guilty of any number of criminal activities. We all know it. I guess this is just the way it works now. Okay. Also, Kamala Harris, if you really want to help, if you're really a patriot and want the best for the United States, you need to just shut all the way up. Nobody needs to hear from you anymore. Live a fine, happy life with your family. Find a nice job you like. I understand you have legal skills. Fine. Stop talking. Stop giving anybody the idea you're going to run for president again. You're the very last person we need. God bless you. Maybe you're well-intentioned. I don't know. Just please, for the love of God, shut all the way up. Now, my best understanding of the Venezuela thing is that Marco Rubio is old school. He's not really a MAGA type. He's just part of the coalition. He's old school, right-wing, conservative Republican who hates Cuba with all of his heart because of his family history. I guess he feels like he was cheated out of his rightful riches when his parents and grandparents had to leave Castro's Cuba. This has got Marco Rubio all over it. He hates Cuba, so go through Venezuela first. We can talk the meat puppet into anything, as long as it strokes his ego. As you and I have discussed at length, you tell him he's the boss of the hemisphere. She has Asia, Russia has his part of the world, and eventually all of Europe, and you can have all of the Western Hemisphere. You are one of the three strong men. Anyway, yeah, it's Marco Rubio and the contingency, the constituents, who loathe Cuba and can't wait for the day for Cuba to be a playground for the rich again, as it once was. Cuba relies on Venezuela, money, oil. In exchange, Cuba provides Venezuela with security, with their very rich culture of medicine, doctors. So, yeah, Venezuela and Cuba have had a pretty decent understanding for quite a while. And Cuba's going to have a pretty tough go of it if they are separated from Venezuelan money and oil. And as is always the case, of course, with the regime, it's a coalition. And this Rubio anti-Cuba component of the coalition is calling the shots here. And they're very happy to include the billionaire buddies, the oil industry. You're going to get your cut for sure. You're going to be a big part of this. Happy to get the Stephen Miller component of the coalition, just plain racist. Well, whatever's the most racist we like. And of course, Russell Vogt, the avowed imperial presidency guy, the unitary executive, loves the idea of the regime acting unilaterally and with unquestioned power, all flowing through the president's office. So yeah, the coalition very happy right now. The regime coalition. Billionaire Paul Singer, remember this guy? A Trump mega donor? He just happened to make a major purchase of Citgo stock just days before the attack of Venezuela. Happened to see the stock market the first day of trading after Venezuela? Up, up, up. Everybody's happy. Yeah, big gains. The Dow jumped nearly 600 points. S&P 500 advanced. NASDAQ up. Energy stocks leading the way. No kidding. Chevron, ExxonMobil, Halliburton. Yeah, they're doing great. They're loving it. And then along with the energy sector, guess who else saw a big bump in their value? The defense industry, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin. Yeah, that's the world we live in. That's who's pushing the buttons. That's who's benefiting. Not you and me. This Venezuela thing is so old school. This kind of behavior goes back to the 19th century. And there have been incidents like this multiple times over the years. But now we're in a time where AI and the climate crisis have us in a very short window of opportunity to get things right. Today's techno-fascists stand like giants over the robber barons of the Gilded Age. The stakes are higher than they've ever been, and the window to get things right is getting shorter and shorter. Well, all right, here we are. 5th anniversary of the insurrection of January 6th, 2021. I'm sad, I'm angry. I think it's important. I think it's absolutely essential that we take time and think about this date, which lives in infamy. The sheer lawlessness of it, of this regime, the shock and horror to so many when the regime returned 4 years later, the shameless whitewashing, sane-washing, revisionist history, absolutely Orwellian, to the point where now, on the anniversary, whitehouse.gov posted a whole site dedicated to lying about the day, saying that Democrats staged the real insurrection, repeating the lies about the stolen election, calling the rioters patriots, blaming Democrats, blaming Nancy Pelosi, blaming the Capitol Police themselves. Yeah, in George Orwell's 1984, the act of rewriting history was referred to as rectification. You remember Winston Smith, the protagonist. That was his job in the records department, RecDep, of the Ministry of Truth, altering historical records. And then the result of these alterations considered the truth in the eyes of the party. That's what we're seeing right now. Yeah, the Orwellian rewrite is really disturbing. But then there are plenty of things to be disturbed about. The many failures that bring us to our sad state today. No failure more damning than Attorney General Merrick Garland. His failure to prosecute the Orange Menace. None of this history should have ever been foisted upon us. Merrick Garland is forever guilty of his criminal negligence, sitting on his hands, doing nothing to prosecute the Orange Menace himself. We don't need to be where we are, if not for Merrick Garland and his catastrophic failure. The failure of Republicans, who, in the immediate aftermath of that terrible day, held the Orange Menace responsible. Lindsey Graham, Senate Leader Mitch McConnell, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, They all knew where the blame rested. They all knew who was solely responsible, and they said so in the halls of Congress as they finished their job of certifying the 2020 election, the election that the sitting president was trying to steal after losing it. An attempted coup. Organized, calculated, planned, executed. The rioters themselves, the violence, the insiders within the halls of Congress, the co-conspirators, the Republican senators falling in line to steal the election, to conduct the coup from the inside. And then the mammoth effort nationwide, worldwide, of misinformation and disinformation. A campaign that would make Goebbels blush. And Merrick Garland and Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy had it within their power to end the madness forever, to put the perpetrators behind bars, to keep them forever anywhere near seats of power. And yet here we are today. It never should have happened. When Merrick Garland finally got around to doing something, prosecutor Jack Smith did everything he could. But by then the clock was his enemy. The calendar was his enemy. Not to mention the stalling tactics of the Orange Menace and his lawyers, not to mention all the assists they received from the courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court. So even though Jack Smith put together a foolproof case, and just in the last week or so he swore to Congress under oath that he had proof beyond a reasonable doubt that Trump was the kingpin. He had him dead to rights for prosecution for insurrection. Had him cold, had him stone cold. But thanks to Merrick Garland's thumb twiddling, the clock ran out. Thanks to the Supreme Court interfering, Jack Smith was stymied. And from that point on, the deniers, the liars. So first, we must never forget. That's our first obligation. First, we must never, ever forget. We cannot let the liars and deniers get the upper hand. But we have a second obligation, and one just as important. We have to learn this same lesson going forward. Because, you see, everything that's happening right now needs to also be remembered. We better take the lesson of January 6, 2021, and take that lesson forward. Everything that's happening now needs to be carefully documented. We have to keep the receipts, as they say. We have to hold everyone accountable. Not only the Orange Menace, all of them. Miller, Vogt, Rubio, Hegseth, all criminals. Some of them mass murderers. Do I exaggerate? Do I engage in hyperbole? No, I do not. The entire Republican Party responsible for the shocking lawlessness and abuse that continues every day. We can't fall back into that ridiculous language about looking forward. Oh, we must focus on the future. Oh, it's really about the economy, you know. We can't be looking back. We don't want to be accused of retribution. Merrick Garland, frozen, absolutely petrified for being accused of politicizing, of somehow looking back, of criminalizing his political opponents. He lost all sense of justice. He completely misunderstood the moment. And we can never do that again. And you're going to hear candidates from the Democratic Party downplay all the crimes of this administration. Oh, yes, they were terrible, but we want to look forward. We're not interested in retribution. You know what? It's not an either or. It's a both and. Yeah, talk about the future. Give us your policies. Tell us what you'll do when you're in charge. And never forget the abuses of this administration. Hold them to account for everything. Make them pay the political price. Make them pay the legal price. Some people belong behind bars. My God, Stephen Miller, just on CNN this week with Jake Tapper. Quote, "We live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time." That's fascist Stephen Miller, Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. That's Stephen Miller of the Miller-Vogt regime, putting words in the mouth of their orange meat puppet. Their own abuse of the Department of Justice to go after political rivals, guilty of the exact same crimes with which they wrongfully charged the Biden administration. Yeah, keep the receipts. Document everything. Hold them accountable for all of this. The ICE raids, the renditions, the deportations, the Venezuela boat murders, threats to the entire hemisphere with this new so-called doctrine, the gutting of USAID resulting in the loss of hundreds of thousands of innocent lives, the Dodgy Boys' infiltration of whole data systems of the federal government, setting up a federal surveillance system over all of us. Talk about Orwellian. International corruption through gifts and crypto, abuse of the pardon power, including the pardoning of all January 6th criminals, even the ones brutally beating Capitol Police, some who died. The decimation of federal responsibilities in all areas, science, health, education, the arts, programs enacted and funded by Congress, the destruction of whole agencies, and the literal destruction of the White House, extortion of universities and law firms, overt racism in federal policy with the lies and distortion of DEI, buddying up with the techno-fascists, the oligarchs, deregulating that entire sector in exchange for plunder, in exchange for surveillance, in exchange for federal contracts, and the use of violence and the threats of violence. We saw the seeds of this in the first Orange regime. We saw the level of violence they're capable of on January 6, 2021. And now in regime number 2, it's a central strategy. Violence on a global stage, from Iran to Yemen to Venezuela, and violence on the political stage. Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota has no choice, he feels, but to drop out of the race for governor, dropping his re-election bid because his children, his young daughter, his autistic son, the targets of countless death threats. When a sitting governor is forced to drop out of his re-election bid because of threats of violence, this country is no longer a democracy. That is not a fair election. Free and fair elections are a thing of the past. At least they are in Minnesota. So, as we commemorate the 5th anniversary of January 6th, please don't ever dismiss how important this day is, because we not only have to keep the truth alive about what happened 5 years ago, we have to take that lesson forward so that the wrongdoing of a whole political party bent on destroying a nation can be confronted and defeated. All right. Thanks for listening. You can hear this episode and all episodes on the website, charlesburcell.com, or of course on your favorite podcast platform. Thanks to our flagship terrestrial station, River West Radio in Milwaukee. Follow on Substack and Blue Sky. Don't forget that daily show is on Substack. Peter Donalds wrote and performed our theme song. All right, I love you. I'll see you out there.